Good morning, everybody. It is Wednesday in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. My name is Adam Bittner, assistant sports editor for multimedia at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, joined today by Seth Engle from the Post-Gazette and the Daily Collegian for our weekly Penn State football show here on the Post-Gazette Sports Now YouTube channel, presented by Voodoo Brewing State College. Seth, how are you?
I'm doing great. Yeah, thanks for having me, Adam. It was a eventful weekend. We're getting going here.
It was. We finally have some football to talk about. A lot of questions on my list. I'm not sure if we'll get to all of them. But the first thing I just want to get into before anything else is Drew Allar. Everybody in the Penn State world is on fire after watching some of the throws he was able to make in Penn State's Saturday night win over West Virginia, 35-15. Really a lot more deep balls than I think you and I were expecting, Seth. But not just that, he looked great on some of the crossing patterns. He was moving, the receivers moving. Those throws were accurate, on the mark. Some of the sideline throws I think were really impressive. Just absolute darts, things that normally look routine, but then you see Drew Allar throw those passes, and you're like, wow, there's some zip on that pass. I'm going to ask you kind of the questions we have along here down the bottom. Is Drew establishing himself as the Big Ten's best quarterback in a minute? But before we get to that, I just want to get your general reactions to the way he played on Saturday night.
Yeah, I mean, holy cow! Like you could not have predicted a better, starting debut for Drew Allar than I think he put up. 21 for 29, 325 passing yards, 3 touchdowns, no interceptions. I know there was, one or two passes that probably should have been intercepted, but they weren't. His stat line looks great. His passer ratings over 200 in your debut. It's pretty good. He was ridiculous. You talk about the zip. I think what stands out most of all is his poise. Like that was the first game he's ever started, and that was against a non-conference Power 5 opponent. Like West Virginia struggled, but it's a legitimate college football program. And he just looked beyond his years. It was exactly kind of what we saw when he came in late in the Purdue game last year, when we're like, oh, this is a true freshman who's moving his feet like that. Nonetheless, at 6'5", 240 pounds. And we saw it again, but for a whole game on Saturday. So it was just, really impressive. Really can't, he won Big Ten Offensive Player of the Year. He couldn't have had a better debut than he had.
I agree. I mean, like you said, I think there was that one throw in the end zone that I thought was looked a little bit like a freshman sophomore type of mistake. But other than that, I think the other one that almost got intercepted was kind of a tipped pass. It was a little high, but I don't necessarily put that one on him. And here, we're talking about not interceptions, like they were interceptions. Like that's how how far you have to litigate it to kind of nitpick his performance. Seth, I just want to get into the conceit of this video now. Is Drew Allar the best quarterback in the Big Ten? I think there's really only two direct competitors in my mind. I think it's Michigan's J.J. McCarthy and Maryland's Taulia Tagovailoa. But the way we saw the other night, was that enough for you to say, if he's not the best quarterback now, that you can easily imagine him being better than J.J. McCarthy, who's already taken a team to the college football playoff, won a Big Ten title? Can you already imagine Drew Allar being the best pure passer in this league by the end of the year?
His debut was phenomenal. It was pretty flawless for the most part. But it's still really hard to say. It's been one game. I know it was a great one game, but there's a long season to play. J.J. McCarthy, at this point, like you mentioned, has college football playoff experience. He's been in those games. We've seen, that he's competent enough to lead a team to those games. Even Cade McNamara has been to the playoff. So until, Drew Allar's able to show consistency, I feel like it's really hard to rank him among these quarterbacks that have, multi-year experience. I think Tagovailoa is, one of the more underrated quarterbacks in the country. And I think he's done a great job over at Maryland. I think skill set wise, Drew's package is pretty incredible, where he's the 6'5" body who's able to move. And he has a ridiculous arm. So I feel like his skill set's probably above Tagovailoa, but when it comes down to it, like the experience just isn't there. So it's still hard to rank him at this point. But, if you're able to win a few more offensive player of the weeks and you're able to throw for 300 yards and 3 touchdowns for, almost every week, I think you're looking pretty good at the end of the year there if you're Drew Allar.
Yeah, I think it might be a little bit premature for exactly the reasons that you mentioned, but he's definitely my top 3 already. There's no one who's really distinguished themselves in this league, and I think that's why you have to be optimistic if you're a Penn State fan. Is you're I don't know if you've always been able to go into some of these games and say you definitely have the better quarterback in the last, even going back to the Trace McSorley days, and I think it's an open question for everyone in the league. I think really for the first time in a long time, of whether he is that number 1 guy. And I think that's what the Penn State's really lacked. I think that's why last year I spent time on the show saying, hey, let's see what Drew Allar's got, because I think he has that upside to be that quarterback Penn State hasn't had in some recent seasons. But who you mentioned though that I really do like is Tagovailoa. I think he's a really good college quarterback who is on a roster that maybe doesn't have kind of the talent to go with him to help him deliver. JJ McCarthy, though, he has the experience, he has the winning behind him, but I don't know if he has the spectacular play to keep Drew Allar at bay. And that doesn't mean I'm going to pick Penn State to beat Michigan today. It just means that come the end of the season, I wouldn't be surprised if we're talking about Drew Allar as the number 1 guy. What was I think you talked about this a little bit, Seth. Was it the poise that was most encouraging for you in that performance? And I think we knew he had the talent, but was it a matter of showing some command and barking out calls the way he did and reading defenses? And that's something I really noticed more on the NBC broadcast than I did watching in the stadium. Was he looked confident and in command, and I think that was probably the most notable part for me.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, that's what I was looking for. Obviously we knew. You could say all you want about Sean Clifford, the quarterback, but like as a field manager, he was one to point fingers and yell out to his O-line, and he really did have control of that offense. It's different with Drew, where he is, if you talk to him, he's a quiet guy. He's young. He's kind of just stepping up into this position and the spotlight. And that is something I was looking for. And I think he did a great job of really managing the offense. And I think he broke out of his shell a little bit too. I talked to Sal Wormley post game, and Wormley said, I don't want to swear on here, but Wormley said that Drew was pretty vocal. We'll say that he was pretty vocal. He said some words that I don't think Sal had ever heard come out of his mouth before. So that to me, I think is really encouraging if you're Penn State, where this quiet guy who already has the talent, that is actually breaking out of his shell and, could be the one to lead this offense to, where it wants to go this season.
I want to talk a little bit more about some other guys on the offense. Obviously Drew Allar is going to steal the headlines, but I thought there were some other encouraging performances. The receivers, I think we can just skip past Keandre Lambert-Smith. A1 performance, looked great. I think he's starting to answer those questions you and I have had about him on this podcast in the month, kind of leading up to the season. Who was the receiver that impressed you maybe second most of that group? Trey Wallace had a nice game. Liam Clifford really impressed me. I think he's my number 1 guy because he made a couple of tough plays to move the chains, and I wasn't really expecting that from him. So I'll make my pick, Liam Clifford. What did you think of that receiver group and how it performed the other night?
Yeah, how about Liam Clifford earning the number 3 spot? I don't think anyone expected that. We were trying to predict, and we were like, Mari Evans, maybe Cephas creeps up. Liam Clifford, I mean, that is unbelievable. But he did look nice. I mean, I think that my surprise, other than Trey Wallace, who had career highs with 7 receptions and 72 receiving yards, props to him. Malik McClain was my guy there. I think that he looked the best. I mean, he's 6'4" and he moves like he's smaller, but he also can use his size to his advantage. Today we talked to Drew, Bo, and Franklin. Everyone had great things to say about Malik McClain. I mean, Franklin made it a point of emphasis to go out of his way in his opening remarks to shout out Malik McClain and how he's, kind of established himself within the culture and really showed it on the field. He had 4 receptions for 58 yards and a touchdown. He looked great. And I know Liam technically won that starting job for week 1, but I don't think that's a competition that's really ended. I think that it could be a week-to-week basis, and I think McClain has the potential to earn that number 3 spot against Delaware.
McClain was a guy who we talked about the receivers a lot. I don't think his name ever came out of my mouth, and maybe that's just oversight on my part because I was kind of looking at Cephas as the guy. As you know, I'm a Pittsburgh guy, right? And Cephas has those Pittsburgh ties, so I think there was a lot of wish casting, maybe not just on my part, but a lot of other fans that this guy that you're more familiar with maybe was going to step up and take that role. Why do you think McClain was kind of overlooked as that other transfer in the group compared to Cephas? Yeah, I guess that's the question.
Yeah, I mean, I think recruiting rankings kind of told the story there. Cephas was one of the top transfers in the country this year on numerous, rankings. So he was expected to be a guy that you plug in right away, and maybe he even contest Keandre Lambert-Smith for that number 1 receiver role. That was the expectation when it happened, when he committed. Since then, we heard about the adjustment period, and we saw him a little bit in practice, running with not the first team. And it's just like, I think he's still adjusting. Maybe he'll get there eventually because it's just different than MAC defenses. But Malik McClain played at Florida State. He knows kind of what Power 5 football is all about. He also, when he committed, I mean, everyone had good things to say about him. And I think he's really just worked really hard, I think, is the bottom line. I think he's worked probably as hard as anyone in that receiver room, and I think he's deserved the playing time that he got on Saturday. And I think it hurts that Cephas came later than McClain did. Like he didn't come with the rest of the transfers. He came in the summer. So I think that probably hurt a little bit.
Quiet night from the tight ends on the receiving front. Was not as if they weren't used. They were deployed in any number of exotic formations at times. What do you make of that, Seth? I think they're going to be fine. But I think it was probably a tribute to the way the receivers were playing that maybe you didn't need to use the tight ends, and maybe Penn State was holding back a little bit. Once you got to halftime, once you got up, 2 or 3 scores, probably felt like you don't want to put anything on tape here in beating West Virginia, maybe with those tight ends and how they want to deploy them. Do you think there was any of that going on?
Yeah, I think it all comes down to like an exact science and strategy when it comes to who they want to utilize. I think that Penn State wants to kind of hide a little bit of what they can do offensively. I don't think they want to put it all on the table week 1. Like, yeah, we're trying to answer questions with, wide receivers and everything, but they're not going to like show everything. It was the same thing that happened last year. It took a little bit for the tight ends to get involved. Tyler Warren was targeted twice. I think Theo Johnson had 1 target. There was nothing there. But nonetheless, after the game, I think Theo Johnson looked probably as happy as anyone that Penn State got the win. I don't think there's any bad blood there, and I think there's been communication that eventually their time's going to come when it's needed. I don't know. Franklin talked about it today a lot. They're not going to force it to a certain position group just to get them targets if they don't need to. So I think that too is a week-to-week basis. And Theo Johnson's going to play. He's going to have receptions. So is Tyler Warren. Just not this week.
Yeah, I think, I mentioned the exotic formations, and we saw that somewhat with the running backs too. How much of that do you think is smoke and mirrors? I think in the second half there, they had like the 3 running backs behind. They weren't in the shotgun. They were under center, and they had 3 guys behind Drew Allar. I was like, geez, this is what everyone in this stadium has been like screaming for online for the last like 10 years, pretty much since James Franklin showed up, certainly during those Big Ten championship years where they only ever seemed to be in the shotgun. How much of that do you think is smoke and mirrors and to kind of psych out some upcoming Big Ten opponents? And how much do you think is really part of that regular offense where, especially on that touchdown that Singleton scored in the second half, where Katron Allen and him could have blocked for each other. I think they could have gone either direction. That seems like the kind of thing that you want to keep in there. Then there was other stuff that seemed like it was a little bit more of a bit and like, oh, look, we got these guys all in the field because we can. What was your read on that, Seth, and how those 2 guys are going to be deployed moving forward?
Yeah, on the Singleton touchdown, you're referring to the T formation, which is
Yes.
just classic Mike Yurcich. I mean, that was a thing all last year. It's an old school offensive tactic that Penn State revived in 2022, and it just works really well. Last year it helped when you had it's usually like Katron and Nick on both ends, and then you put a tight end in the middle. Brenton Strange was arguably the best blocking tight end in the country last year, so it worked like exceptionally. I think on the Nick Singleton touchdown, they had Khalil Dinkins in the tight end spot. So that's promising. It's such a fun play call. And like the thing that's kind of interesting about Yurcich, and it took a little bit of adjustment, is just like he does like to play around a little bit. Like similar to the usage of position groups, like with tight end, like he's going to keep you guessing all the time. You're never going to really know what Penn State's game plan's going to be until they actually, show up in the red zone and line up two running backs and a tight end, and you don't know who the ball's going to. You really don't. So it's fun to see, and it's equally tricky for opponents to game plan for.
I want to talk a little bit about the defense before we do. Just a quick shout out to our presenting sponsor, which is Voodoo Brewery and State College. Enjoy the world-renowned craft beer and delicious cocktails at Voodoo Brewing Company, State College Pub, located right off College Avenue at 201 Elmwood Street, State College. VBC State College has something exciting going on every day of the week. Join them this fall on Mondays for weekly free play cornhole tournaments, or test your knowledge with pub trivia every Tuesday at 6. Wednesday is their game night featuring game boards, card games, and the Nintendo Switch. Every Thursday, your boy Dots hosts bingo, but this is not your Nana's bingo. Saturday, they have the Nittany Lions and college football, and every Sunday they will have either the Steelers, Eagles, or NFL Red Zone on the screen. Make sure you check them out this weekend, or all through football season. Seth, let's get into the defense a little bit. Not a really, I think, dominant effort from that group. But there was times where I said they're not getting home. The pass rush doesn't kind of look like what we've been sold and hyping ourselves up for. But it also felt like West Virginia was doing a lot of stuff to mitigate that, getting the ball out quickly, moving the pocket. I think about that long pass that set up the first touchdown for West Virginia. Garrett Green had that ball out before any Penn State rushers had a chance to get to them. So where do you think that balance was between West Virginia was trying to neutralize and Penn State wasn't getting home on some of those rushes?
Yeah, Penn State really struggled to stop the run, and that was a problem last season too. And you look back to the Michigan game, that was the question mark. Was like, if you're going to compete and try to win a Big Ten, like you have to be able to stop Blake Corum. And after week one, it's just like I don't know if they are ready to do that yet. They were without Keziah Zard. He was out with an injury, but it's not season ending. Franklin told us today. As we know, Alonzo Ford's out for the season. So they're lacking some defensive tackle depth at the moment. But the guys that were on the field for most of the game was Devon Ellies, Hakeem Beeman, and Zane Durant. I think they struggled a little bit against Donaldson, who had a great game, and Garrett Green. They were getting pummeled all the time. West Virginia wasn't. They don't want to test Kalen King or that Penn State secondary, so they're going to run the ball. And I'm pretty sure that was circled on Penn State's game plan already. They just didn't necessarily execute. The thing that is interesting about the team, though, is like once you get into that second level, if you're a team that likes to rush the ball, like it's hard to get past Penn State's linebackers. So you'll probably see a lot of like 5-6 yard rushes, and they'll stop them before the first down. But I mean, getting loss of yardage and stopping them at the line of scrimmage is really going to be, maybe the most important thing for this team moving forward.
Yeah, I think it really was those runs up the middle. Todd Blackledge, when I rewatched the game, was calling it out that particularly the interior of that Penn State defense, did feel a little soft. And there were times that, I think West Virginia, if they had been a little bit more patient and disciplined, and they just kept doing what was working, maybe that, gets them to another field goal or another touchdown, and they don't lose contact with Penn State as quickly. Are you really looking at that Illinois game in a couple of weeks on the road as a big test, given what happened in State College 2 years ago? The way they, that Brett Bielema offense just kind of pounded Penn State into submission in that, infamous 9 overtime game. People remember it for the 9 overtimes. I remember it from sitting there and just feeling like Penn State was helpless, to stop that Illinois running game.
Yeah, I'm not too worried. I mean, it's a test because it's the Big Ten opener, but there was one reason why Illinois was even in that game, and it's because of their running back Chase Brown was absolutely ridiculous. He's gone now. He's in the NFL. I think he broke the Beaver Stadium rushing record that day. He was well over 200 yards. Like that, he was the reason why Illinois was even in contention. He's the reason why they ended up winning the game. Illinois doesn't really have that anymore. I mean, they played Toledo, narrowly won. Their leading rusher had 58 rushing yards. Like Illinois, they're not used to a guy having under 100 rushing yards in a game because they've had Chase Brown for the last few years. So when it comes to like stopping the rush, I don't know if I'm necessarily looking at Illinois as the test. I think Illinois is a great defense, so that'll be a test in that regard. But when it comes to rushing the ball, I mean, Michigan's the real test. I think Ohio State's a test. But I don't really know about the Illini there.
Come on, we got to give the people a reason to keep watching until then, right, Seth? I think I don't have any doubts that Penn State's going to win that game. And kind of the point you made earlier, I looked up midway through the third quarter, I think, and on the scoreboard, West Virginia had both less than 100 yards, both rushing and passing, and I said, man, it didn't feel that way, and so I'm sure that you could probably imagine a similar effort unfolding. In the macro at Illinois. I guess I'm just more curious if we're going to see any growth from the West Virginia game to the Illinois game, because I think maybe it's too strong a word, but just will we see some growth, and would that be an opportunity to see it in your mind?
Yeah, I mean, I think anytime you open Big Ten play, like that's when you're really going to start to throw all you have. If you're a college team, I think there were some growing pains last year too along the D line, especially on the edge. Last year, like it took until probably mid-season to really see the true potential of that D line. So yeah, I think by week 3, once you kind of get rid of those growing pains and you loosen up a little bit, hopefully for Penn State, Izzard comes back to add some depth there. They know where people fit best. Hopefully for them, that's a week where things start to come together before they really start to get into the bulk of the season. And they're able to prepare for, those 2 true tests in Ohio State and Michigan.
What did James Franklin have to say about that kicking situation? Obviously, Sanders Sahaydak missed a couple of field goals to the frustration of the crowd. I think that really changed the perception of the contest. That Penn State was in much more control than it seemed. If they'd gotten those 2 field goals, I think it becomes a bit of a blowout much earlier. What did James Franklin have to say about that situation and his level of confidence that they're going to get this straightened out by the time those games you mentioned are coming around?
Yeah, I think second to run defense and greatest question marks on this team has to be field goal kicking. Like that will kill a program. When you're in a close game with Michigan or Ohio State and it comes down to a game-winning field goal, and it may be, outside of 40 yards, I don't think Penn State has a guy right now that they're completely confident can make that kick. So that's a problem for them. Sanders Sahaydak, like you mentioned, he missed the 2 field goals. Was taken out at halftime. Falcons came in, hit a couple. I think he had 3 PATs and a field goal. I don't think that competition's done yet. I think Delaware is a good game where you can kind of play both and let them play it out on the field. Give Sahaydak another chance, but that's a problem. You can't. I think having a really consistent field goal kicker is one of the more underrated aspects of successful college teams, and it could come back to bite Penn State. I don't want to speak too soon on anything, but like it doesn't look like there's anyone that's like they're that confident in yet. So we'll see how it plays out against Delaware.
Do you think the atmosphere had anything to do with that, Seth? Rarely do we see, a game this big, this early at home. Granted, it wasn't a huge game, I think, in terms of whether Penn State was going to win or not. They were 3 touchdown favorites, but you had what they called sneaky whiteout crowd last week. There was a lot of energy in the stadium. You didn't really have that kind of quieter chance to warm up against, like a Delaware that you're going to see this week. Do you think that played a part in what we saw, or do you think that this is the Penn State kicking situation, and that it's going to be a concern for a couple of weeks here?
Well, so Haydick's a redshirt sophomore, so this is his third year on campus. I feel like he should know what to expect by now, in terms of those rowdy crowds. Like, he's seen it before. Felkins is a guy who transferred from Columbia, so this is his first time ever seeing anything even remotely close to this. And he played all right, so it doesn't really make sense to me. I mean, maybe it was the 4th largest crowd in Beaver Stadium history, so maybe that played something into it, and it is a mental game when you're actually out there. But I don't know. There are probably a number of pieces why it just didn't go right for Sahaydak. But I will say one thing. Franklin mentioned that Sahaydak stood up after a recent practice and spoke to the whole team, spoke out of his heart. He wants to be great. He doesn't want to let this team down. He wasn't embarrassed to say that and apologize. So, I think that says something about the kind of guy he is. And I think that gives Franklin a reason to maybe give him another chance.
Seth, I'll let you out of here on this. I know James Franklin addressed Neil Brown's comments after the game about going for the touchdown late. I know it made a lot of Penn State bettors happy because that helped them cover the spread. What did James Franklin say? And maybe what was your read on, was that the right thing to do in that situation? Or was it, especially knowing that you're going to have to go down to Morgantown next year?
Yeah, I understand why it seems like they're trying to run the score up, but they did put in their second string offense. Like, they're trying to get Bo Pribula reps. That was his first college game, and they wanted to put him against a cover 0, and he did well. So when Bo has never had the opportunity to play a college game, he's putting him in. He's trying to get him reps and the other second string guys. Like, I have no problem with that at all. It would have been one thing if they're keeping in Drew in that first team offense and actually just running up the score just to do it because they're like trying to be disrespectful. That's not what that was. And that's pretty much what Franklin was like explaining today, what I feel like a lot of people didn't understand. I think it also says something that, I believe West Virginia's first team defense was still on the field, and they still couldn't stop Penn State's second string offense. So I think that says, a little bit if West Virginia really wanted the game to end so bad, then maybe they should have, been prepared to stop Penn State's twos.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point, and we'll see, next year when they go down to Morgantown, if that has any impact on the lead up, the conversation, to the extent that people are trying to turn this into a rivalry. I'm sure those West Virginia fans are going to remember. Seth, any final thoughts, especially as we look ahead toward Delaware? Anything you want to see this week? It's an opponent you're expecting Penn State to beat handily, but we still have to be looking for things. So what's on your mind as we move into week 2 here?
For Penn State, I'm looking for a wide margin of victory. Like, this is a game that there should be 0 question marks about. I know there was a little bit of struggle in the first half against West Virginia. This is a game Penn State has to come out of the door swinging and not slow down at all. Like I'm saying, putting up like 60, 70 points type of game. That'll really kind of show what this team really is, if they really are as dominant as they, maybe people expect them to be. This is a game that shouldn't be close at all. Delaware probably shouldn't score at all. Big question mark with the defense. Like, if you struggled against West Virginia, you better not struggle against Delaware, is basically how this is. Run defense, obviously, we talked about. I don't want to see special teams, miss a PAT or field goal. But basically, those question marks that we talked about all day today, answer them against an FCS team. That's all it is.
Yeah, I think it's going to be interesting to watch that play out. Everyone stay tuned for later in the week after the Penn State-Delaware game. Seth is submitting his post-game video reports from Beaver Stadium. got a nice reception this week, so we're going to keep them going. So thanks to Seth for that. And thanks, Seth, for stopping by. Looking forward to talking again next week as we set up that Penn State-Illinois game.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Adam.
Absolutely. Take care, everyone, and make sure to stay tuned. Check out the North Shore Drive with Christopher Carter later today. I believe he has a special guest, so make sure you stop by for that.
Thank you for checking out this content from Post-Gazette Sports. If you enjoyed the video, please like it and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Check out our Apple Podcast channel for more podcast content. Click below for a special deal of 99 cents for a 3-month subscription to the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette.